Colorado Territory, 1875. A woman clutches a well-worn letter as the stagecoach lurches over the final mountain pass. Her breath catches at the majestic vista before her, endless peaks touched with snow even in June, valleys of dense pine, and, somewhere among them, the home of the man whose careful handwriting has guided her across a continent. Hope and uncertainty war within her as the coach begins its descent into the unknown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What awaits her isn't the warm welcome she traveled 2,000 miles to find, but a reckoning with nature's fury and a chance meeting that will test everything she believes about fate, resilience, and her own capacity for courage. In the wild heights where few dare to venture, she'll discover that beginnings rarely follow the paths we imagine, and that sometimes the greatest journeys start when plans collapse. The stagecoach shuddered to a halt in the small mining settlement of Silvercliff, its wooden wheels groaning in protest at the rough mountain road they'd traversed. Eleanor Reed pressed a handkerchief to her lips, trying to calm the flutter of nerves that had intensified with each mile of the journey. At 25, with honey-brown hair swept into a practical bun and eyes the shade of a summer storm, she possessed a quiet determination that had carried her from Boston across a continent. "Silver Cliff," announced the driver, his voice rough from years of shouting over mountain winds. "End of the line." Eleanor smoothed the creases from her practical grey travelling dress. The simple garment had been fashionable enough in Boston, but appeared woefully inadequate against the rugged backdrop of the Colorado Territory. The thin wool offered little protection against the surprising chill of the June air at this elevation. "Mr. Richard Dawson?" she asked, scanning the small gathering of curious onlookers who had assembled to witness the stagecoach's arrival. "I'm expected." The driver, a weathered man named Hargrove, squinted at her before spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Don't see Dawson. Unusual for him to miss the stage. His claim's about 7 miles up Pine Creek way." Eleanor felt the first tremor of unease. After 14 months of correspondence, she had travelled nearly 2,000 miles to meet Richard Dawson, whose letters had described a prosperous silver mine and a comfortable cabin nestled in a valley rich with promise. His last letter, dated just 6 weeks prior, had explicitly stated he would meet her stagecoach on this day. Her trunks were unloaded from the coach, and then Hargrove was climbing back onto his seat, eager to begin the return journey before darkness claimed the treacherous mountain passes. Within moments, the stagecoach was disappearing around a bend in the road, leaving Eleanor standing alone with her possessions in a settlement that appeared to consist of little more than a general store, an assay office, 2 saloons, and a scattering of rough-hewn cabins. "Need help with those trunks, ma'am?" A boy of about 13 approached, his clothes patched but clean, his expression openly curious. "Yes, thank you." Eleanor reached into her reticule for a coin. "Is there somewhere I might wait while inquiries are made about Mr. Dawson? I'm expected to be at his home today." The boy's face clouded. "Mr. Dawson's place, up at Silver Pine Gulch?" "Yes, that's right, his silver mine, the North Star, I believe he called it." The boy exchanged glances with an older man who had wandered over from the general store's porch. Something passed between them, a wordless communication that sent a chill through Eleanor's heart. "Ma'am," the older man said, removing his hat, "I'm Walter Jenkins, own the general store here. Might be you haven't heard the news. There was a terrible avalanche up at Silver Pine Gulch about 4 weeks back. Dawson's cabin and most of his outbuildings were destroyed." Eleanor felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "And Mr. Dawson?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the man's expression. "Nobody's seen him since. Search parties went up for near 2 weeks, found some of his belongings scattered across half the mountainside, but no sign of Richard himself." The world narrowed to a pinpoint of light as Eleanor struggled to comprehend the magnitude of her situation. Richard Dawson was missing, presumed dead. His home was destroyed, and she was standing in a mountain settlement 2,000 miles from Boston with trunks containing everything she owned and less than $40 to her name. "Is there a hotel?" she managed to ask, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Got a boarding house," Jenkins replied. "Mrs. Holloway's place. Clean, respectable. $2 a week, meals included. $2 a week." Even with her modest funds, that would give her little more than a month before financial disaster. Eleanor had invested almost everything in this journey, selling her late parents' home and settling their outstanding debts before departing Boston. What remained after purchasing her ticket and traveling expenses was meant to help establish her new life with Richard, not sustain her alone in this wilderness. "You'd be Mrs. Dawson then?" Jenkins asked gently. "Miss Reed," she corrected, straightening her shoulders. "Eleanor Reed. Mr. Dawson and I were to be married upon my arrival." Understanding dawned in Jenkins' eyes. "Mail-order bride," he said, not unkindly. "You're not the first to come to these parts seeking a fresh start, Miss Reed, though your circumstances are more unfortunate than most." Eleanor appreciated his direct manner. In Boston, people would have danced around the subject, with euphemisms and pitying glances. Here, at least, her situation was acknowledged plainly. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Jenkins. I would appreciate directions to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house." Jenkins instructed the boy to help with Eleanor's trunks, then pointed out a whitewashed, two-story building at the far end of the settlement's single street. "Tell Clara that Walter sent you. She'll treat you fair." Clara Holloway proved to be a brisk, efficient widow in her 50s who asked few questions and showed Eleanor to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Supper's at 6, she announced. "Breakfast at 7. Lunch you're on your own, as most folks are about their business midday." Left alone, Eleanor sat on the narrow bed and finally allowed the full weight of her situation to settle upon her shoulders. She had no home to return to in Boston, no family to take her in. The teaching position she had reluctantly abandoned would long since have been filled, and the man whose letters had painted pictures of a shared future amid mountain splendor was in all likelihood buried beneath tons of snow and rock, yet amid the despair a small flame of practical determination remained. Eleanor had not survived the loss of both parents to consumption, managed a household alone for 3 years, and traveled across a continent only to surrender at the first calamity. She would allow herself this evening to absorb the shock. Tomorrow, she would begin forming a new plan. Supper in Mrs. Holloway's dining room provided Eleanor with her first glimpse of Silvercliff society. Besides herself, there were 6 boarders, 4 men and 2 women. The men were connected with the mines in various capacities, an assayer, a clerk from the mining company office, and 2 engineers. The women were both teachers at the settlement's small school. Conversation flowed around Eleanor, who answered direct questions politely but volunteered little information about herself. The others seemed to sense her distress and respectfully limited their curiosity, though Eleanor caught the occasional glance of sympathy. "You planning to head back east, Miss Reed?" Mrs. Holloway asked as she served apple pie for dessert. "I haven't decided," Eleanor replied honestly. "I need to assess my options." "Settlements short on educated women," observed Sarah Winters, the older of the 2 teachers. "If you've any teaching experience, school board might be interested." Eleanor had indeed taught at a ladies' academy in Boston. "I would certainly consider it," she said, "though I understand the term is nearly finished for the summer." "New term starts in September," Sarah nodded. "But they're already looking for someone to replace Miss Turner here, who's marrying in August." The younger teacher blushed. "James finally convinced the mining company to promote him to head engineer. We'll be moving to Denver after the wedding. This small exchange planted the first seed of possibility in Eleanor's mind. If she could secure a teaching position for the fall term, she might have a temporary solution to her predicament. But that still left the question of how to support herself through the summer months. After supper, Eleanor retired to her room and methodically unpacked one of her trunks. Among her possessions was a cedar box containing Richard Dawson's letters, 23. In all, each filled with descriptions of his silver mine, his cabin with its view of the mountains, and his hopes for their life together. The Richard who emerged from these pages was thoughtful, hard-working, and ambitious. He had written of his plans to expand the mine, to build a larger home once they were married, to perhaps eventually move to Denver, where their children could receive proper education. All those dreams now lay buried beneath an avalanche. As ephemeral as the morning mist that clung to the mountainsides, morning brought clearer thinking and the practical necessity of action. After breakfast, Eleanor approached Mrs. Holloway. "I'm interested in seeing Mr. Dawson's property," she said. "Would it be possible to hire a guide to take me there?" Mrs. Holloway frowned. "That's rough country, Miss Reed, especially with the spring melt making the creeks run high. And there's nothing left to see but destruction. Nevertheless, I need to see it for myself." Eleanor's tone brooked no argument. "I've traveled too far to simply accept second-hand accounts." Mrs. Holloway studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Jeff Taylor sometimes guides for hunting parties. Has a couple of sturdy horses. He might be willing to take you up there." Jeff Taylor turned out to be a taciturn man in his 40s who agreed to guide Eleanor to Silver Pine Gulch for the sum of $3, a significant portion of her remaining funds, but a necessary expenditure in her mind. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he said after examining her riding attire and finding it passable for mountain travel. "It's a full day's journey there and back. Terrain's still unstable in places, so we won't be able to get too close." To where the cabin stood, Eleanor spent the remainder of the day making practical inquiries around the settlement. She visited the small school, introduced herself to the board chairman, and expressed interest in the teaching position that would be available in the fall. Her Boston education and 3 years' experience at Fairfield Academy impressed the chairman, who promised to discuss her application at the next board meeting. She also visited Jenkins' General Store, where the proprietor proved to be a valuable source of information about Richard Dawson. "Came out here about 5 years ago," Jenkins recalled, measuring out coffee beans for another customer. "Kept mostly to himself, but was fair in his dealings. The North Star wasn't the richest claim in these parts, but it produced steady enough. Richard was smart, didn't waste his earnings on drink or gambling like some do. His letters mentioned a cabin and outbuildings," Eleanor said. "He described them in some detail." Jenkins nodded. "Had a nice setup. Cabin wasn't fancy, but it was solid. Built a small stamp mill to do his own initial ore processing. Had a barn for his mule and a workshop where he did some tinkering. Richard was handy that way, always designing improvements for his mining equipment." "And the avalanche destroyed everything?" "Most everything. Winter was harsh this year, and spring brought sudden warmth. Makes for dangerous conditions when all that snow starts shifting." Jenkins shook his head. "Nature's got her own way of reminding us who's really in charge up here." That evening, Eleanor reviewed her finances and made careful calculations in a small ledger book. After paying for tomorrow's guide, she would have $34.75 remaining. The boarding house would cost $16 for 2 months, assuming she could stretch her stay until the teaching position began, if she secured it. That would leave her less than $20 for all other expenses over the summer. It was a precarious position, but not an impossible one. She might find temporary employment in the settlement. Mrs. Holloway had mentioned needing help with mending and laundry. Jenkins had a "Help Wanted" sign in his store window. Neither opportunity would pay particularly well, but they might provide enough to sustain her until the school term began. Eleanor was practical enough to recognize that returning east wasn't a viable option. The journey had depleted most of her resources, and there was nothing to return to. Her parents' modest home had been sold, their possessions either packed in her trunks or sold at auction. The few distant relatives she possessed had made it clear after her parents' deaths that their charity had limits. No, whatever future awaited Eleanor Reed would be built here in the Colorado Territory, among these mountains that had claimed the man she had traveled so far to marry. Dawn brought clear skies and a crisp wind as Eleanor met Jeff Taylor at the livery stable. He had saddled 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding for himself and a smaller, calmer mare for Eleanor. "Ever ridden in mountains before?" he asked, giving her riding skirt and boots a skeptical glance. "I'm familiar with horses, though admittedly not mountain trails," she replied, mounting with practiced ease that seemed to marginally increase his confidence in her abilities. They set out as the sun crested the eastern peaks, following a narrow trail that wound steadily upward through pine forests. The air was sharp with the scent of evergreens and the occasional sweetness of wildflowers in small meadows they passed. Under different circumstances, Eleanor might have found the landscape breathtaking. Taylor maintained a steady silence for the first few miles, focusing on the trail ahead. Only when they stopped to rest the horses beside a rushing creek did he offer more information about their destination. "Silver Pine Gulch lies between 2 ridges," he explained, pointing northward. "Steep slopes on both sides, narrow valley floor. Good water supply from the creek, timber for building, and silver veins running through the western ridge, where Dawson's claim was located. But that same geography that makes it good for mining makes it vulnerable to slides." "Have there been avalanches there before?" Eleanor asked. Taylor nodded. "Small ones nature's way in these mountains, but this spring was different. Whole mountainside came down after 3 days of unusual warmth, followed by heavy rain. Created the perfect conditions for disaster." They continued their journey, the trail becoming steeper and less defined. Eleanor's thighs ached from gripping the saddle, and her hands were sore from holding the reins across difficult terrain. But she refused to complain. This pilgrimage to Richard's final home was necessary for her to fully accept her circumstances and move forward. By midday, they reached a vantage point where the trail opened onto a wider path. Taylor reined his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing to a valley below them. "That's Silver Pine Gulch." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. From their elevated position, the devastation was clear. One entire side of the valley had been scoured clean by the avalanche. Trees snapped like twigs, boulders the size of wagons strewn carelessly across the landscape. The spring melt had carved new channels through the debris field, creating a chaotic maze of mud, rock, and splintered timber. Dawson's cabin stood there. Taylor pointed to a particularly devastated area near a bend in the creek. Nothing left now but some scattered timbers and the stone from his chimney. Eleanor stared, trying to reconcile the peaceful valley Richard had described in his letters with the scene of destruction before her. He had written of sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the western ridge with golden light. Of the garden plot he had cleared for vegetables, of the wild raspberry bushes that grew near the creek. Now there was only desolation. "Can we get closer?" she asked, her voice steady despite the ache in her heart. Taylor frowned. "Ground still unstable, not safe to ride down there." "Then I'll walk." "I need to see it, Mr. Taylor, please." Something in her expression must have conveyed her determination, for after a moment's consideration, he nodded reluctantly. "We'll tie the horses here. Follow exactly where I step, understand? One wrong move on that debris field could trigger another slide." They picked their way carefully down a game trail that skirted the edge of the avalanche's path. The destruction became more apparent with each step. Household items scattered among the debris, a broken chair leg here, the remains of a barrel there, a twisted piece of metal that might once have been part of a stove. Taylor stopped at the edge of what appeared to be an impassable jumble of rocks and splintered trees. "This is as far as is safe," he said firmly. "Dawson's cabin was about 100 yards that way." Eleanor stood silently, trying to absorb the reality before her. This was to have been her home. The man who had written those thoughtful letters was presumably buried somewhere beneath this chaos of earth and timber. As she turned to retrace their steps back to the horses, a glint of metal caught her eye. Something was reflecting sunlight from between two fallen pines, about 20 feet away. "Mr. Taylor, what's that?" she asked, pointing. He squinted in the direction she indicated. "Hard to say. Might be part of Dawson's mining equipment." "I'd like to see it." Taylor looked ready to object, then sighed. "Stay here. I'll check it." He maneuvered carefully across the unstable ground, reaching the fallen pines and bending to examine whatever had caught Eleanor's attention. After a moment he straightened and made his way back to her, holding a small object in his hand. "Clock," he said, holding it out to her. "Dawson's, most likely." Eleanor took the pocket watch, its silver case dented but intact. She carefully opened it to find the glass cracked, but the face still legible. The hands had stopped at 4:17, marking the moment when the avalanche had destroyed everything in its path. "He mentioned this in his letters," she said softly. "It was a gift from his father." The personal connection to Richard made the disaster suddenly, painfully real in a way that seeing the destruction had not. This watch had been carried in his pocket, wound by his hand. Now it was stilled forever, just as his life had been. Eleanor closed the watch and slipped it into her own pocket. It was a small piece of the man she had travelled so far to meet, the only tangible connection she would ever have to Richard Dawson. They had turned to leave, picking their way back toward the horses, when a sound caught their attention, the distant report of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. Taylor froze, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "That came from up valley," he said, his voice low, "past where Dawson's place stood." "Is there another mine in this area?" Eleanor asked. "Shouldn't be. This whole gulch was Dawson's claim." Taylor's expression was suspicious. "Could be a hunter, but game's scarce since the avalanche. Most likely claimed jumpers, thinking to work at Dawson's mine now that he's gone." Another shot rang out, followed by the distinct sound of metal striking rock. Taylor helped Eleanor down from her mare, then set about caring for the horses while Blackwood led them to the cabin. Inside, they found a single room with a stone fireplace, a built-in bunk along one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and basic cooking implements hanging from pegs. Everything was meticulously organized, the mark of a man who understood that survival in the wilderness depended on order and preparation. "I'll get a fire started," Blackwood said, moving to the hearth with the ease of familiarity. Jenkins keeps firewood stacked out back. While he busied himself with the fire, Eleanor took stock of their surroundings. The cabin, while rustic, was clean and sturdy. Its windows, though small, offered views of the mountain slopes and the darkening sky. She could understand why someone would choose this life of solitude amid such grand scenery, though it was far removed from anything she had experienced in Boston. Taylor entered with their saddlebags. "Horses are settled," he reported, his tone suggesting he remained uncomfortable with their situation, but was making the best of it. "I've got some jerky and hardtack in my provisions. Not much of a supper, I'm afraid." "Jenkins keeps a storage pit out back," Blackwood said, using a long stick to arrange the logs in the fireplace. "Dried venison, beans, flour. He'd expect travelers to use what they need." The fire caught quickly, illuminating the cabin with golden light as darkness gathered outside. They worked together to prepare a simple meal: Blackwood showing them the storage pit dug into the cool earth behind the cabin, Taylor handling the cooking, Eleanor arranging the table with the few utensils available. As they ate, Eleanor studied. Gabriel Blackwood surreptitiously. He was not what she had expected to find in these mountains. Despite his rough appearance, there was something in his manner, a precision to his movements, a carefulness in his speech when he chose to use it, that suggested education or training beyond what one might expect of a mountain dweller. "You mentioned you knew Richard," she said when the silence had stretched too long. "Were you friends?" Blackwood considered the question while chewing a piece of venison. "Neighbors," he said finally. "My claim's further up the valley. We helped each other when needed. Winter's hard up here, breeds cooperation even among men who prefer solitude. You're a miner as well, among other things." His gaze met hers directly. "Been up here for 5 years, worked claims, trapped furs, guided hunting parties when funds ran low." "And now you're working Richard's claim," Taylor said, the accusation clear in his tone. Blackwood's expression hardened. "I'm securing it," he corrected. "Claim jumpers were already nosing around when I found his body, testing the boundaries, seeing what they could steal. I've been keeping watch, nothing more." "Out of the goodness of your heart?" Taylor's skepticism was evident. "Out of respect," Blackwood replied sharply. "Dawson was a decent man. Doesn't deserve to have vultures picking over his life's work before he's even coaled in the ground." He turned to Eleanor. "His claim papers are likely with his belongings. As his intended, you might have some rights to it, though the mining commissioner would have to make that determination." Eleanor hadn't considered this possibility. She had come to Colorado to be Richard's wife, not to take possession of his property. Yet the practical reality of her situation demanded consideration of all options. "I'm not familiar with mining laws," she admitted. "Complicated," Taylor said. "Normally an unmarried man's property would go to his closest kin. But with a documented agreement to marry, you might have a case, especially if you can prove financial investment in the journey." "Richard's letters," Eleanor said. "They explicitly mention our arrangement, and I have receipts for my travel expenses." "Commissioner in Silvercliff might recognize that," Taylor nodded. "Or might not. Mining laws still evolving in the territory." Blackwood watched this exchange silently, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Why are you still here, Mr. Blackwood?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "The Avalanche was weeks ago. You found Richard, buried him honorably. Why remain in this destroyed valley?" Her direct question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Promised Dawson I'd look after his interests if anything happened to him," he said finally. "Man makes few true friends in the wilderness. When he does, those bonds matter." The simple declaration revealed more about Blackwood's character than any lengthy explanation could have. Whatever else he might be, he was a man who honored his commitments, even to the dead. Night settled fully around the cabin as they finished their meal. The sleeping arrangements presented an obvious challenge: 1 bunk, 3 people, and propriety to consider. "I'll sleep by the fire," Blackwood said, solving the problem before it needed discussion. "Taylor can take the floor near the door. Miss Reed gets the bunk." Neither Eleanor nor Taylor argued with this arrangement. Blackwood excused himself to check on their horses, leaving them alone in the cabin. "I don't trust him," Taylor said quietly, once Blackwood was gone. "Man living, alone in the mountains, just happens to be watching over Dawson's claim. Convenient." "He seems honorable enough," Eleanor replied, though she understood Taylor's caution. "And he's offered to show me Richard's grave. That's all I need from him." "We should head back to Silvercliff first thing tomorrow." "After you've seen the grave," Taylor insisted. "These mountains are no place for a woman alone." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She was contemplating the strange turns her journey had taken. traveling across a continent to marry a man she'd never met, only to find him buried in a mountain grave, and now spending the night in a trapper's cabin with two strangers. Nothing in her Boston upbringing had prepared her for these circumstances, yet oddly she felt no fear. Grief for the future that would never be, certainly. Uncertainty about what lay ahead, without question. But not fear. There was something about these mountains, their enduring presence, their stark beauty, that put human concerns into perspective. Blackwood returned, bringing with him the sharp scent of pine and the night's chill. He moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency, banking the fire to last through the night, checking the shutters on the windows, arranging his bedroll near the hearth. Eleanor retired to the bunk, pulling a rough woolen blanket around her shoulders. Despite the day's emotional and physical exertions, sleep proved elusive. Through half-closed eyes, she watched as Taylor settled uncomfortably on the floor near the door, his pistol within easy reach. Blackwood lay motionless near the fire, though she suspected he remained as awake as she was. In the deep silence of the mountain night, Eleanor found her thoughts returning to Richard's letters. He had written with such enthusiasm about this place, the beauty of the mountains, the promise of the silver veins running through the ridges, the peace he found in solitude that wasn't quite loneliness. He had invited her to share that life, and she had accepted, imagining a future far different from her constrained existence in Boston. Now that future was gone, replaced by a blank canvas of uncertainty. Yet somewhere beneath the grief and confusion, Eleanor felt the stirring of something unexpected, a curiosity about what this wild land might offer to a woman willing to embrace its challenges. Dawn came early to the mountains, light creeping across the cabin floor as Eleanor woke from fitful sleep. Blackwood was already gone, his bedroll neatly stowed. Taylor was just rising, looking stiff from his night on the hard floor. "He's checking the horses," Taylor said, noting her questioning glance at Blackwood's empty space. "Man moves like a ghost. Didn't hear him leave." They prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and leftover biscuits. Blackwood returned as they were finishing, carrying a small bundle of wildflowers. "For the grave," he explained briefly, seeing Eleanor's curious look. The gesture touched her unexpectedly. This gruff mountain man, who had already fulfilled his obligation to his friend by providing a proper burial, had thought to gather flowers for a grave that would soon be visited by the woman who had traveled so far to marry him. "Thank you," she said simply. They set out immediately after breakfast, leaving the horses at Jenkins' cabin. The climb to the ridge where Richard was buried proved challenging. The trail, if it could be called that, was steep and in places barely discernible. Eleanor was grateful for her sturdy boots and determined not to show weakness, though her breathing grew labored as they ascended. Blackwood set a deliberate pace, occasionally pausing to point out footholds or offer a steadying hand at difficult passages. Taylor followed behind Eleanor, watchful and still suspicious of their guide. After nearly an hour of climbing, they reached a small plateau near the ridge crest. The view was spectacular, mountain peaks stretching to the horizon, valleys carved by ancient glaciers, forests of pine and aspen, creating a patchwork of green and gold across the landscape. "He's there," Blackwood said quietly, pointing to a cairn of stones piled carefully against the backdrop of the endless vista. A simple wooden cross marked the grave. Eleanor approached slowly, the reality of Richard's death finally, fully settling upon her. The man whose words had carried her across a continent, whose vision of a shared future had given her the courage to leave everything familiar behind. He lay here, beneath these mountain stones, forever part of this wild, beautiful land. Blackwood placed the wildflowers at the base of the cross, then stepped back, giving her privacy in this moment of final farewell. Eleanor knelt beside the grave, touching the stones gently. "I came," she whispered. "I'm sorry it was too late." She remained there for several minutes, silently communing with the man she had never met in life. When she finally rose, she felt a sense of completion, not closure exactly, but an acceptance of what was and what could never be. As they prepared to descend, Eleanor took one last look at the panoramic view from Richard's final resting place. In that moment of contemplation, she noticed something curious. A valley beyond the ridge, tucked between towering peaks, seemingly untouched by the devastation that had claimed the lower slopes. From this elevation, she could see meadows, a sparkling lake, and what appeared to be a small cabin nestled among trees. "What's that valley?" she asked, pointing. Blackwood followed her gaze, his expression changing subtly. "Home," he said simply. "You live there?" Eleanor was surprised. "It looks perfect." "Hidden Valley," Taylor murmured. "Heard rumors about a place like that. Trappers' tales. Didn't think it was real." "It's real enough," Blackwood said. "Protected by the ridges. Avalanches go around it, not through it." Eleanor studied the valley with new interest. From this height it appeared like a sanctuary amid the harsh mountain terrain, a secret garden hidden from the world. "Is that where your mining claim is located?" she asked. Blackwood hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "My claim's near there," he said finally. "Valley itself is different, special." Something in his tone captured Eleanor's attention. This taciturn man, so economical with words, clearly felt deeply about this hidden place. "I'd like to see it," she said impulsively. Taylor frowned. "Miss Reed, we should start back to Silvercliff. We've accomplished what we came for." But Eleanor was still looking at Blackwood, whose expression had become unreadable again. "Would you show me before we return?" For a long moment he didn't respond. Then, almost reluctantly, "Not many outsiders have seen it. I understand if you prefer to keep it private," Eleanor said, sensing his hesitation. Blackwood studied her, his ice-blue eyes intent. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it, for he nodded once. "I'll show you, but it's another few hours of hiking. Might need to spend another night at Jenkins' cabin before heading back to Silvercliff." Taylor started to protest, but Eleanor cut him off. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Blackwood." As they began their descent from the ridge, Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected, a stirring of curiosity and anticipation that temporarily overshadowed her grief. Richard was gone, and with him the future she had imagined. Yet here in these mountains, another path was revealing itself, leading toward a hidden valley and mysteries yet to be discovered. The descent from Richard's grave was more challenging than the ascent had been. Loose shale slid beneath their boots, and the morning sun beat down with surprising intensity. Gabriel Blackwood moved with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain goat, occasionally reaching back to offer Eleanor a steadying hand at particularly treacherous spots. "We'll stop at Jenkins' cabin to rest and collect supplies," he said as they reached more level ground. "The trail to Hidden Valley is longer but less steep." Taylor had maintained a stony silence throughout their descent, his disapproval evident in the tight set of his shoulders. When they reached the cabin and paused to drink from the creek, he finally spoke his mind. "Miss Reed, I was hired to take you to Dawson's property and back to Silvercliff, not to go gallivanting across these mountains on some wild expedition." Eleanor understood his concerns, but her decision was made. "I appreciate your position, Mr. Taylor. If you feel you must return to Silvercliff, I won't hold you to any obligation. Mr. Blackwood can guide me back tomorrow." "And leave you alone with him?" Taylor's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "A man we know nothing about, in mountains where nobody would hear a scream." "I can hear you perfectly well," Blackwood commented from where he was filling canteens at the creek. "And your concern is reasonable. You don't know me." He straightened, facing them directly. "Which is why I suggest we all go together. You see Miss Reed safely to Hidden Valley, stay the night there instead of here, and start back to Silvercliff at first light tomorrow." Taylor considered this compromise, clearly weighing his responsibilities against his instinctive distrust. "Of Blackwood, the valley has better shelter than Jenkins's cabin," Blackwood added. "My place there is small, but it's solid. You can keep your pistol close if it makes you feel better." This practical acknowledgement of Taylor's suspicions seemed to ease the guide's tension slightly. "Fine," he conceded, "but we leave at dawn tomorrow, no matter what." They gathered what supplies they could carry comfortably: water, jerky, a few biscuits from their breakfast. Blackwood added a small packet of coffee and a worn leather pouch that clinked with metallic contents. At Eleanor's questioning glance, he simply said, "Tools." The journey to Hidden Valley took them along a different route than they had traveled previously. Instead of following the main valley floor, Blackwood led them through a series of interconnected, smaller ravines and passages that seemed to wind around the devastation caused by the avalanche. As they walked, Eleanor noticed changes in the vegetation. The trees grew taller, more verdant. Wildflowers appeared in greater profusion: columbines, Indian paintbrush, and delicate mountain bluebells carpeting small meadows. The air itself seemed different, softer somehow, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers rather than the raw smell of broken earth and uprooted trees that had permeated the avalanche zone. "The valley has its own climate," Blackwood explained, noting her interest in their surroundings. "Protected by the ridges on all sides. Snow falls gentler there. Winds don't cut as sharp." "How did you find it?" Eleanor asked, fascinated by the increasingly lush landscape. "By accident," he admitted. "Got caught in a blizzard 5 years back. Was working a claim closer to Silvercliff. Followed a game trail, seeking any shelter from the storm. Wound up in a narrow pass that opened suddenly into the valley." He glanced up at the sky, remembering. Storm was still raging outside the pass, but inside, just gentle snowfall, peaceful, like stepping into a different world. It was the most he'd spoken at one time, and Eleanor sensed that Hidden Valley had significance to him beyond mere shelter or beauty. "And you stayed?" she prompted. Blackwood nodded. "Built a cabin. Staked a claim on a promising vein in the western ridge. Valley provides everything else a man could need: game, timber, water, even hot springs near the lake." Taylor, who had been listening with grudging interest, looked skeptical. "Sounds too perfect. Why isn't it overrun with settlers or miners?" "Hard to find if you don't know the way," Blackwood replied. "Passes are narrow, easily missed, and I've been selective about sharing its location." They rounded a bend in the ravine they'd been following, and Blackwood stopped. "Almost there," he said, pointing to a narrow fissure in the rock face ahead. "That pass leads to Hidden Valley. Single file through there. It widens on the other side." The passage was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for a person to walk through sideways in some spots. The rock walls rose 30 feet on either side, creating a channel that twisted like a snake for nearly 50 yards before suddenly opening up. Eleanor emerged from the pass and found herself speechless at the vista before her. Hidden Valley lay like a jewel, cupped in the palm of surrounding peaks. A crystal-clear lake occupied its center, reflecting the blue sky and mountain heights. Meadows of wild flowers stretched from the lake's shores to the surrounding forest, of pine and aspen. And nestled among trees at the far end of the valley was a cabin, larger and more substantial than Jenkins' dwelling, with a covered porch and what appeared to be several outbuildings. "It's beautiful," she breathed when she finally found her voice. "Like something from a story." Even Taylor seemed impressed, his usual caution momentarily forgotten as he gazed at the pristine landscape. "Valley floor is about 3 miles across," Blackwood said. "Lakes fed by underground springs, stays warm enough that it never freezes completely, even in the deepest winter." "And you live here alone?" Eleanor asked. A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. "For the past 3 years, yes. There was a story there, perhaps loss or tragedy, but Eleanor didn't press. They had all experienced grief in different measures. They followed a well-worn path from the pass toward the cabin, crossing meadows where deer grazed, seemingly unalarmed by human presence. The afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, and Eleanor found herself breathing more deeply, as if the air itself contained some restorative property. "The miners in Silvercliff tell stories about places like this," Taylor said as they walked. "Hidden paradises in the mountains. Most think they're just tall tales told over whiskey." "Most things worth finding aren't easy to find," Blackwood replied. As they drew closer to the cabin, Eleanor could see it was indeed more substantial than it had appeared from a distance. Built of squared logs with a stone foundation, it featured a covered porch that wrapped around two sides, glass windows, a rarity in these mountains, and a sturdy stone chimney. The outbuildings included what appeared to be a workshop, a small barn, and a storage shed, all constructed with the same attention to detail as the main cabin. "You built all this?" Eleanor asked, impressed by the craftsmanship evident in every structure. Blackwood nodded. "Had time. Winter lasts 8 months up here." A small vegetable garden occupied a sunny patch near the cabin, its neat rows showing signs of careful tending. Beyond it, fruit trees, apple and cherry from what Eleanor could identify, stood in ordered rows, though they were still too young to bear much fruit. "You're not just mining here," she observed. "You're creating a homestead." Something like approval flickered in Blackwood's eyes. "Mining pays for supplies I can't produce, but silver's fickle. Land, if respected, provides more reliably." They reached the cabin, and Blackwood ushered them onto the porch. "Rest here," he said, indicating chairs crafted from bent willow branches. "I'll bring water." While he disappeared around the side of the cabin, Eleanor took the opportunity to examine her surroundings more closely. The porch offered a panoramic view of the valley, with the lake gleaming in the afternoon sun and mountains rising majestically. Beyond, someone had positioned the chairs to take maximum advantage of this vista, suggesting an appreciation for beauty that seemed at odds with Blackwood's taciturn nature. The cabin door stood partially open, and Eleanor caught glimpses of the interior, a large stone fireplace, sturdy furnishings that appeared handcrafted, and something unexpected, bookshelves. The mysterious mountain man evidently had a library. Blackwood returned with a pitcher of water and 3 tin cups. The water was cold and sweet, tasting of minerals from deep underground springs. "Your cabin is remarkable," Eleanor said after quenching her thirst. "Far more substantial than I expected to find in these mountains." "A man builds according to how long he plans to stay," Blackwood replied, his gaze sweeping across the valley. "I'm not leaving." The simple declaration held conviction born of deep certainty. Whatever Gabriel Blackwood had been before coming to these mountains, he had found his place in this hidden valley. Taylor, who had been examining the outbuildings with professional interest, rejoined them on the porch. "That's a proper forge in your workshop," he observed. "You're a blacksmith as well as a miner?" "Learned smithing in the army," Blackwood said. "Useful skill up here. Can't exactly ride to town when a tool breaks or a horseshoe needs replacing." This casual mention of military service provided another piece to the puzzle of Gabriel Blackwood. A soldier, a miner, a blacksmith, a builder, he was clearly a man of diverse skills and experiences. "You mentioned your mining claim," Eleanor said. "Is it productive?" "Productive enough." Blackwood gestured toward the western ridge. "Vein runs through there, not the richest strike in Colorado, but steady. I work it when supplies run low or winter nights get too long." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, casting the valley in golden light that softened every contour and highlighted the vivid colors of wildflowers in the meadows. "I should check on dinner," Blackwood said, rising. "Venison. Stew been simmering since morning. This domestic detail surprised Eleanor. She had expected perhaps jerky and beans, not a carefully prepared meal. "Can I help?" she offered, unwilling to be merely a guest when their host had already shown such hospitality. Blackwood seemed momentarily taken aback by the offer, then nodded. "Could use help with the bread." Inside, the cabin revealed more about its owner than his sparse conversation had. The main room was warm and inviting, with a stone fireplace at one end and the promised bookshelves lining one wall. The furnishings were simple but beautifully crafted. A table and chairs, a writing desk positioned to catch northern light through one window, a comfortable-looking chair before the hearth. Everything spoke of careful workmanship and attention to detail. The books, however, were the most revealing. Eleanor scanned the titles, while Blackwood checked a pot of stew hanging in the fireplace. Classics of literature, volumes on engineering and metallurgy, histories of the West, and, surprisingly, several books of poetry. A cast-iron stove stood in one corner, already warm. Blackwood showed her where he kept flour and other baking supplies, then returned to the stew. Eleanor set about mixing a simple bread dough, finding unexpected comfort in the familiar task. "You've created something remarkable here," she said as she worked. "Most men would have focused solely on the mine." Blackwood stirred the stew thoughtfully. "Mining's uncertain. Seen too many men stake everything on a vein that played out in months. This valley," he gestured around them, "this is the real treasure." Taylor entered the cabin, having completed a perimeter check that seemed more habit than necessity. He watched their domestic scene with poorly concealed surprise. "I've watered the horses," he reported. "Valley grass looks rich enough to keep them fed overnight." Blackwood nodded appreciation. "There's coffee in that canister if you want to." "Brew some," he offered. The three settled into a rhythm of preparation that felt oddly companionable despite their brief acquaintance. By the time the bread was baking in the Dutch oven and the stew was ready, twilight had descended on the valley, painting the lake in shades of purple and gold. They ate on the porch, watching darkness gather while enjoying a meal that far surpassed anything Eleanor had expected to find in the wilderness. The venison stew was rich with vegetables Blackwood had grown himself and preserved through winter. The bread, though simple, had turned out well. Even Taylor seemed to relax somewhat, his earlier suspicions temporarily set aside in favor of appreciation for good food and extraordinary scenery. "How long have you been in Colorado, Mr. Blackwood?" Eleanor asked as they finished their meal. He considered the question. 7 years total. First 2 near Denver, then up to Silver Cliff area, then here for the past 5. And before that, his expression closed slightly. Army, Union Cavalry. Before that, Pennsylvania. "You fought in the war," she said. Not a question. Blackwood nodded, once his gaze fixed on the darkening valley. "Along with too many others." There was something in his tone, a controlled neutrality that suggested deeper emotions held carefully in check. Eleanor recognized it. She had heard it in the voices of men in Boston who had returned from the conflict that had nearly torn the nation apart. "My brother James served with the Massachusetts 20th, she said quietly. "He didn't come home." Blackwood met her eyes then, something like recognition passing between them. Many didn't. It was a simple acknowledgement of shared loss, offered, without platitudes or false comfort. As night settled fully over the valley, the stars emerged with an intensity Eleanor had never experienced in Boston. Thousands upon thousands of pinpricks of light spread across the sky, their brilliance unmarred by city smoke or gas lamps. "I've never seen so many stars," she said, gazing upward. "Valleys far from any town lights," Blackwood replied. "In winter, when the moon is new and the sky is clear, there's enough starlight to cast shadows." Taylor had grown quiet, perhaps lulled by the meal and the peaceful surroundings. He stifled a yawn. "We should turn in soon if we're to leave at dawn," he reminded them. Blackwood rose. "I'll show you where you can sleep. Miss Reed, there's a small room off the main cabin. Was meant to be a pantry, but I've put a cot there. Taylor, you can take the loft." The arrangement was practical and maintained propriety. Eleanor thanked him and followed as he lit a lamp and showed her to the small room. It was indeed tiny, little more than a closet with a narrow cot. But it was clean and private. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. After 2 days of travel and emotional revelations, even this modest accommodation seemed luxurious. Left alone, Eleanor sat on the edge of the cot, trying to process all she had experienced. Since arriving in Colorado, just days ago, she had expected to meet and marry Richard Dawson. Now he lay in a mountain grave, and she found herself sheltered in a hidden valley by a mysterious man who seemed as much a part of these mountains as the pines and peaks themselves. What path lay before her now? Return to Silver Cliff, and hope for the teaching position. Attempt to claim Richard's mine despite knowing nothing about mining. Or was there another option? One not yet clear, but perhaps beginning to form in the hidden spaces of possibility. Through the small window of her room, Eleanor could see the starlight reflecting on the lake. There was peace in that vista, a serenity that called to something deep within her, something that had been stifled by the constraints of her Boston life, but now stirred with newfound strength. Tomorrow would bring decisions and departures. But tonight, in this unexpected sanctuary, Eleanor allowed herself to simply be present in the moment, surrounded by the quiet majesty of Gabriel Blackwood's Hidden Valley. Morning in Hidden Valley arrived with golden lights spilling through Eleanor's small window. For a moment, waking in the unfamiliar space, she felt disoriented. The journey from Boston to Colorado, the devastating news about Richard, the discovery of this secluded paradise, all swirled in her mind before settling into clarity. Today they would return to Silver Cliff. The thought brought less relief than she might have expected just days ago. She dressed quickly in her travel attire, now somewhat worse for wear after mountain trails and campfire smoke. When she emerged from the small room, she found the main cabin empty, though a pot of coffee simmered on the stove and fresh biscuits sat wrapped in a cloth near the hearth. Outside, the valley was transformed by morning light. Mist rose from the lake in delicate tendrils, and dew sparkled on meadow grasses. Eleanor spotted Taylor near the barn, checking their horses. Of Blackwood, there was no immediate sign. She poured herself coffee in a tin cup and stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply of the morning air, sharp with pine and rich with the scent of damp earth warming in the sun. Boston's air had never smelled this clean, this alive. "Good morning." The voice startled her. Blackwood had approached silently from the direction of the garden, a basket of fresh greens in his hand. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd already bathed in the lake or springs he'd mentioned. "Good morning," she replied. "This valley is even more beautiful in the dawn light." He nodded, glancing across the landscape with evident appreciation despite his familiarity with it. Changes with every season, every hour, never looks quite the same twice. Something about his observation, its poetry, despite his economical words, caught Eleanor's attention. This man noticed details, valued beauty even as he maintained his practical existence. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for showing me this place, for taking me to Richard's grave, for your hospitality." Blackwood accepted her gratitude with a slight incline of his head. "Should thank you for the bread. Been a while since I've had fresh-baked food." The simple exchange felt weighted. With things unsaid, Eleanor sipped her coffee, trying to formulate the questions that had kept her awake much of the night. "Mr. Blackwood, you mentioned Richard's mining claim might have some legal complications," she began. "What would be involved in determining its status?" He studied her over the rim of his own coffee cup. You thinking of claiming it? I'm considering all options, she replied honestly. I came to Colorado with specific plans that are no longer possible. Now I need to formulate new ones. Blackwood set his cup down, giving her question the serious consideration it deserved. Mining commissioner in Silvercliff would be your first stop. You'd need to present Richard's claim papers, proof of your arrangement with him, and file an application for transfer of mineral rights. And the likelihood of success? Hard to say. Law recognizes widows' rights to claims, but your status is unusual. His gaze was direct. Some commissioners might recognize a mail-order arrangement as binding if you can prove financial investment. Others might not. Eleanor appreciated his candor. And if I were to secure the claim? What then? I know nothing about mining. Could sell it, he suggested. Several men in Silvercliff would pay a decent price, even with the Avalanche damage, or hire someone to work it for a percentage of profits. These were practical solutions, yet neither felt quite right to Eleanor. Selling Richard's claim seemed like abandoning the last connection to the future she had journeyed west to find. Yet attempting to manage a mining operation as a woman alone in the Colorado territory presented formidable challenges. What would you do? She asked impulsively. If you were in my position. Blackwood considered her question with characteristic thoroughness. Depends on what you want from life, he said finally. Quick resolution? Sell the claim, use the money to establish yourself elsewhere. Longer commitment? Stake your rights and form a partnership with someone who knows mining. Territory's growing. Opportunities exist beyond what might have been possible back east. His assessment aligned with her own emerging thoughts. The teaching position in Silvercliff offered security but little independence. Selling Richard's claim might provide funds, but would sever her connection to the purpose that had brought her west. You mentioned partnership, she said carefully. Would that be feasible for a woman in my circumstances? Taylor approached. Before Blackwood could answer, his expression making it clear he was eager to depart. Horses are ready, Miss Reed. We should head out if we want to reach Silvercliff before dark. Blackwood nodded. The moment for private conversation passed. I'll pack some food for your journey. Preparations for departure moved swiftly after. At that, Blackwood provided jerky, biscuits, and dried fruit for their saddlebags. He also, to Eleanor's surprise, presented her with a small leather pouch. Silver, he explained when she looked questioningly at him. From Richard's mine, not much, but it's rightfully yours. The gesture touched her deeply. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll be careful dealing with the mining commissioner, he replied. And Preston at the bank. Both have reputations for taking advantage of those unfamiliar with territorial practices. This practical warning was delivered matter-of-factly, but Eleanor recognized it as genuine concern for her welfare. I'll remember that, she promised. As they prepared to mount their horses, Eleanor found herself reluctant to leave. This hidden valley had offered unexpected sanctuary during a time of confusion and grief. Returning to Silvercliff meant facing decisions that would shape her future in this rugged territory. Mr. Blackwood, she said, as he handed her the reins to her mare, I want to thank you again for everything. Few strangers would have shown such consideration. He met her gaze directly. Not many find their way to this valley. Those who do usually have reason to be here. The cryptic statement lingered in Eleanor's mind as they rode away from the cabin, following Blackwood, who led them through meadows toward the hidden pass. Was he suggesting their meeting had some purpose beyond chance, or simply acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought her to his secluded domain? The journey through the narrow pass and back into the network of ravines that would lead them toward Silvercliff proceeded in relative silence. Taylor rode ahead, eager to returned to familiar territory. Eleanor followed, with Blackwood bringing up the rear. This arrangement gave her time to absorb her surroundings and contemplate the decisions that awaited her. When they stopped to rest the horses at midday, Eleanor found herself alone with Blackwood briefly, as Taylor scouted the trail ahead. "You never answered my question," she said, "about partnership being feasible for someone in my position." Blackwood took a drink from his canteen before responding. "Mining partnerships aren't uncommon in the territory. Usually between men, yes, but law doesn't prohibit women from participating." He studied her thoughtfully. "Right partner would be critical. Someone who knows mining, respects your contribution, treats you as equal. Are such men common in these parts?" she asked wryly. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not common anywhere, I'd guess." Taylor returned before they could continue the conversation, but the exchange had given Eleanor much to consider. A partnership might indeed be the most practical solution to her dilemma, assuming she could find a trustworthy partner with the necessary skills. As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually transformed from the lush environs near Hidden Valley to the rougher, more exposed terrain leading towards Silvercliff. They skirted the edge of the Avalanche zone, the site of its devastation a stark reminder of how quickly circumstances could change in these mountains. By late afternoon, the outline of Silvercliff appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden structures nestled against the mountainside, smoke rising from chimneys, the rhythmic pounding of the stamp mill audible even from afar. "We'll reach in town before sunset," Taylor announced, clearly relieved to have fulfilled his obligation. Eleanor nodded, though she felt no corresponding relief. Silvercliff represented uncertainty rather than safety. "I have business in town tomorrow," Blackwood said unexpectedly. "Mining supplies. Could accompany you to the commissioner's office if you decide to pursue Richard's claim." The offer surprised both Eleanor and Taylor. The mountain man had seemed eager to return to his solitude, yet here he was, proposing to extend his time among people. "That's very kind," Eleanor said, genuinely appreciative. "I would welcome your knowledge of the process." Taylor looked less pleased with this development, but made no comment. Their arrival in Silvercliff caused a minor stir. Word of Eleanor's situation had evidently spread, and curious glances followed their progress down the settlement's main street. Mrs. Holloway stood on the boarding house porch, arms crossed, watching their approach with undisguised interest. "Brought her back safe, I see," she called to Taylor as they dismounted. Her sharp gaze moved to Blackwood, recognition dawning. "Gabriel Blackwood. Haven't seen you in town for months." Blackwood touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Mrs. Holloway. You'll be needing your room back, Miss Reed?" The landlady addressed Eleanor while continuing to study Blackwood with obvious curiosity. "Yes, please," Eleanor replied. "For tonight at least." Taylor helped unload her saddlebags, then departed with obvious relief, his obligation fulfilled. Eleanor turned to Blackwood, suddenly aware of how their acquaintance might appear to Silvercliff's residents. A mail-order bride returned from the mountains in the company of a reclusive bachelor. "Thank you again for your assistance," she said formally. "What time would be convenient to meet tomorrow regarding the commissioner's office?" 9, he replied, seeming untroubled by potential gossip. "I'll be at the general store. Need to order supplies first." With a nod to both women, he mounted his horse and rode toward the livery stable, his erect posture and confident seat revealing his cavalry background. Mrs. Holloway waited until he was out of earshot before pouncing. "Well now, that's a development. Nobody expected. Gabriel Blackwood escorting you back to town. Man hardly speaks to anyone when he comes for supplies every few months." Eleanor maintained her composure. "Mr. Blackwood knew Richard Dawson. He was kind enough to show me where Richard is buried and has offered to help me understand the legal status of the mining claim." Mrs. Holloway's expression suggested she found this explanation incomplete, but was willing to wait for more. Details. Supper's at 6. You looked like you could use a hot bath before then. A bath proved to be exactly what Eleanor needed. Mrs. Holloway had a copper tub brought to her room and filled with steaming water, a luxury that washed away the trail. Dust and eased muscles unaccustomed to days on horseback. By the time she changed into a fresh dress, one of the few she'd packed that wasn't designed for travel, Eleanor felt somewhat restored to herself. Supper in the boarding house dining room subjected her to well-meaning but intrusive questions. From the other residents, she provided a simplified account of her journey to Richard's property, the confirmation of his death, and her visit to his grave. She made no mention of Hidden Valley or the night spent in Blackwood's cabin, instinctively protecting both his privacy and her reputation. After the meal, Eleanor sought the solitude of her small room, where she carefully examined the pouch of silver Blackwood had given her. The raw ore was rough but clearly valuable, perhaps enough to extend her stay at the boarding house while she determined her next steps. Those steps remained unclear. The teaching position still offered the most straightforward solution to her immediate needs, yet Eleanor found herself reluctant to commit to it. Something about her experiences of the past few days had awakened a desire for more than just security, a yearning for the kind of independence and purpose she had glimpsed in Gabriel Blackwood's self-created domain. A knock at her door interrupted these reflections. Mrs. Holloway stood outside, holding a folded paper. "This came for you yesterday," she said. "From the school board." Eleanor thanked her and unfolded the note once alone. It was brief and to the point. The board wished to interview her for the teaching position at 10 o'clock the following morning. The timing presented an immediate conflict with her planned meeting with Blackwood and visit to the mining commissioner. She would have to choose, pursue the security of the teaching position, or explore the more uncertain path of claiming Richard's mine. Sleep proved elusive that night. Eleanor's thoughts alternated between practical considerations, her dwindling funds, the approaching winter, the challenges of establishing herself in this remote community, and less tangible concerns. What kind of life did she truly want? What had she been seeking when she agreed to travel west as a mail-order bride? Security, certainly, but also adventure, purpose, the chance to define herself beyond the limited options available to women. In Boston society, by dawn, she had reached a decision. She would meet with Blackwood and visit the mining commissioner first. Understanding her legal position regarding Richard's claim was necessary, regardless of what path she ultimately chose. The school board could wait. If they truly wanted her, they would reschedule the interview. This small assertion of independence felt significant. All her life, Eleanor had followed prescribed paths and met others' expectations. Her journey west had been her first real deviation from that pattern. Now, she was choosing to prioritize her own interests and judgments rather than immediately pursuing the safe option. Morning brought clear skies and a fresh perspective. Eleanor dressed in her most businesslike attire, a navy skirt and jacket that had been fashionable in Boston the previous year. She arranged her hair simply but neatly, conscious that appearances would matter in her dealings with the mining commissioner. When she descended to the dining room for breakfast, Mrs. Holloway eyed her approvingly. "You look ready for business," she observed. "School board will be impressed." "Actually," Eleanor replied, finding confidence in her decision, "I've decided to visit the mining commissioner first." "I'll have to reschedule with the school board." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose. "Bold choice. Most women would grab a teaching position." "I'm not most women," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "At least, I don't think I am anymore." The landlady studied her for a moment, then nodded with something like approval. "Colorado territory changes people, usually for the better if they let it." At precisely 9 o'clock, Eleanor arrived at Jenkins' general store to find Gabriel Blackwood already there, discussing an order with the proprietor. He looked different in town, more guarded, his shoulders set with a tension that hadn't been evident in Hidden Valley. "Miss Reed," he acknowledged her with a nod. "Ready to face the commissioner?" "Yes," she replied, matching his businesslike tone. "I've brought Richard's letters, which clearly state his intention to marry me upon my arrival." "Good. Documentation helps." He turned to Jenkins. "That order can wait till we're finished at the commissioner's office." The storekeeper glanced between them with undisguised curiosity. "Take your time. Mining Commissioner Wilson doesn't open his office till 9:30 anyway. Always stops for coffee at Clara's first." Blackwood nodded his thanks, then gestured for Eleanor to precede him out the door. On the boardwalk outside, away from Jenkins' curious ears, he spoke quietly. "Wilson's fair but formal. Expects everything by the book. Don't let him rush you." "Thank you for the advice," Eleanor said, "and for accompanying me. I know town visits aren't your preference." His expression softened slightly. "Some things worth the discomfort." The simple statement, delivered without elaboration, carried a weight that Eleanor felt but couldn't quite interpret. Was he referring to helping her specifically, or to the general principle of facing discomfort for worthwhile causes? Before she could consider further, he gestured toward a small building near the assay office. "Commissioner's office. Let's see what rights you have to Richard Dawson's legacy." Mining Commissioner Wilson's office was Spartan but meticulously organized. Maps of local claims lined the walls, each carefully labeled with claim names and ownership information. A massive ledger book dominated his desk, its pages filled with precise handwriting documenting the complex web of mineral rights that underpinned Silvercliff's economy. Wilson himself matched his office, orderly, precise, and formal. In his 50s, with a neatly trimmed grey beard and wire-rimmed spectacles, he carried himself with the authority of a man whose decisions could make or break fortunes. "Miss Reed," he acknowledged Eleanor with a slight bow. "Mr. Blackwood." His eyebrows rose slightly in the mountain man's presence. "Unusual to see you in town." "Unusual circumstances," Blackwood replied simply. Wilson gestured for them to be seated in straight-backed wooden chairs before his desk. "I understand you're inquiring about Richard Dawson's claim, the North Star, correct?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "I arrived from Boston expecting to marry Mr. Dawson, only to discover he had perished in the Avalanche." Wilson's expression softened marginally. "Unfortunate situation, my condolences." He adjusted his spectacles. "However, mining claims follow specific rules of inheritance. Without a legal marriage having taken place, the claim would normally revert to blood relatives or designated heirs in Mr. Dawson's will." "Does such a will exist?" Eleanor asked. Wilson consulted his ledger. "No will has been filed with this office. As for relatives, our records indicate Mr. Dawson listed no next of kin when registering his claim 5 years ago." "I have these," Eleanor said, removing Richard's letters from her reticule. 14 months of correspondence, culminating in specific arrangements for marriage upon my arrival. I also have receipts showing my financial investment in traveling here to fulfill that arrangement. The commissioner accepted the letters, examining them carefully. His expression remained neutral as he read through several, pausing occasionally to make notes. "These do establish clear intent," he acknowledged, returning the letters. "However, intent does not constitute a legal marriage. Territory has precedent." Blackwood spoke for the first time since introductions. "Peterson case in Denver, 68. Court recognized the mail order arrangement when the groom died 2 days before the bride's arrival. Granted her claim rights based on good faith and financial investment in the arrangement." Wilson looked surprised at Blackwood's legal knowledge. "You're familiar with territorial mining case law, Mr. Blackwood?" Man lives in these mountains. He learns what matters, Blackwood replied evenly. The commissioner's assessment of the mountain man visibly shifted. The Peterson case does provide precedent, he conceded, though this situation differs in some respects. How so? Eleanor asked. Time elapsed between death and claim assertion, for one. Peterson died 2 days before his bride arrived. Dawson has been dead for approximately 4 weeks. A difference I could hardly control, Eleanor pointed out. The stagecoach schedule, from Boston to Colorado Territory, is fixed. I arrived at the first possible opportunity following our arranged date. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. He made another note in his ledger. There's also the matter of the claims condition. The avalanche caused significant damage to workings and structures. Under normal circumstances, failure to maintain a claim can result in forfeiture. Acts of God are exempted in the Territorial Mining Code of 64, Blackwood countered. Section 12, paragraph 3 specifically mentions natural disasters, beyond human control, as non-forfeit conditions. Again, Wilson seemed impressed by Blackwood's knowledge. You're correct. He studied Eleanor for a moment. Miss Reed, assuming I were to recognize your claim based on the Peterson precedent, what would be your intention? A woman alone would face considerable challenges operating a mining claim in these mountains. The question was direct but not unkind. Eleanor appreciated his frankness. I'm considering several options, she replied with equal directness, including potentially forming a partnership with someone possessing the necessary expertise. Wilson's gaze shifted briefly to Blackwood before returning to Eleanor. I see. He closed his ledger decisively. I'll need time to review the precedents and confirm the claim's current status. Can you return tomorrow morning? I should have a determination by then. Of course, Eleanor agreed, recognizing this was as close to a positive response as she could hope for initially. Outside the commissioner's office, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That seemed potentially promising. Wilson's. Fair, Blackwood said. He'll follow precedent if it applies. Your letters made a strong case. Your knowledge of mining law was unexpected, she observed, as they walked back toward the main street. You've studied it extensively? A shadow crossed his face. Learned from necessity. Had a claim dispute years back. Man tries to take what's yours. You learn how to fight with law before resorting to other means. The hint of a difficult past intrigued Eleanor, but she sensed it wasn't a story Blackwood was ready to share. Instead, she changed the subject. The school board requested an interview at 10 o'clock, but I chose to meet with the commissioner instead. I should stop by and reschedule. Blackwood nodded. Makes sense to keep options open until Wilson decides. I need to finish with Jenkins about supplies. Meet you at the hotel for lunch? Can discuss next steps once you've spoken to the school. Aboard. The casual suggestion of continued collaboration warmed Eleanor unexpectedly. That would be helpful, thank you. The schoolhouse stood at the far end of Silvercliff's main street, a simple but well-maintained building with a small bell tower. Inside, Eleanor found Sarah Winters, the older teacher she had met during her first days in town. Miss Reed, Sarah greeted her. The board was expecting you an hour ago. I apologize for missing the appointment, Eleanor said. I had an urgent meeting with the mining commissioner regarding Mr. Dawson's claim. I'm hoping to reschedule the interview. Sarah's expression held curiosity rather than disapproval. The board members have dispersed to their businesses for the day, but I can speak with Chairman Mercer about the meeting tomorrow. She studied Eleanor thoughtfully. May I be frank, Miss Reed? Please. The board was quite interested in your credentials. Boston education is highly regarded here. However, they expect commitment. If you're pursuing mining interests, they may question your dedication to teaching. The observation was fair, if uncomfortable. Eleanor appreciated the honesty. I understand their concern. The truth is, I'm exploring all viable options for establishing myself here. Until yesterday, I believed the teaching position was my only practical choice. Sarah nodded. And now you have alternatives to consider. The commissioner was receptive to your claim? He's reviewing the precedents. I'll know more tomorrow. I see. Sarah's expression softened. For what it's worth, I think you'd make an excellent teacher. The children here need exposure to broader perspectives than our little settlement provides, but I also understand the appeal of independence. Eleanor felt a connection to this practical, forthright woman. May I ask a personal question, Miss Winters? Sarah, please. And yes, have you found satisfaction in teaching here, in building a life in these mountains? Sarah considered the question seriously. Satisfaction? Yes. The work matters. These children, miners' sons and daughters, shopkeepers' little ones, they deserve education as much as any Boston child. She glanced out the window at the mountain vista. As for life here, it demands more but offers freedom eastern cities can't provide. A woman alone can build something meaningful without constant judgment or restriction. The perspective resonated with Eleanor's emerging thoughts. Thank you for your candor. Will you be staying in Silvercliff, regardless of the commissioner's decision? Sarah asked. I don't know yet, Eleanor admitted. Much depends on tomorrow's meetings. After arranging for a potential interview the following afternoon, Eleanor made her way back toward the boarding house. The settlement felt different now that she had spent time in the mountains, more confined despite its frontier openness, the buildings temporary against the eternal presence of the surrounding peaks. At Mrs. Holloway's boarding house she found Blackwood waiting on the porch, his tall figure drawing curious glances from passers-by, unaccustomed to seeing the reclusive mountain man in town. School board, he asked as she approached. Rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Eleanor replied, after we meet with the commissioner. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway. Dining room open if you two are hungry, she announced, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp with interest. Inside, they found a private table in the corner of the dining room, away from the curious ears of other patrons. Over a simple meal of venison stew and fresh bread, they discussed the morning's meeting. If Wilson recognizes your claim, Blackwood said, keeping his voice low, you'll need to decide quickly how to proceed. Claims unworked for 30 days can be challenged, especially valuable ones like the North Star. Would it be considered worked if I simply visited it regularly? Eleanor asked. Blackwood shook his head. Law requires good faith effort to extract minerals, usually interpreted as actual mining activity, digging, processing, or maintenance of equipment. Activities I know nothing about, Eleanor sighed. Could learn, Blackwood suggested. Or hire someone, or partner with someone who knows. The third option hung between them, unspoken but present. What would such a partnership entail? Eleanor asked carefully. Hypothetically, Blackwood considered his expression thoughtful. Typically, claim owner provides rights and some capital. Partner provides labor and expertise, profits split according to agreement. 50-50 is common, but arrangements vary. And in this hypothetical partnership, where would each person live? Eleanor kept her tone neutral, despite the impropriety of the subject. Separate cabins would be necessary, Blackwood replied without hesitation. Territory's frontier, but propriety still matters. His immediate recognition of the issue and straightforward solution eased Eleanor's concerns somewhat. If they were discussing what she thought they were discussing, at least he understood the social constraints involved. This hypothetical arrangement, she pressed, would it be purely business, or might other considerations apply? Blackwood met her gaze directly. Started as a business, perhaps. Future would depend on the individuals involved, their compatibility, their willingness to consider possibilities beyond initial arrangement. The careful phrasing held multiple meanings. Eleanor felt a flutter of something beyond practical interest. Gabriel Blackwood was a compelling man, intelligent, capable, principled. Their brief acquaintance had revealed complementary perspectives and shared values despite their different backgrounds. "Speaking hypothetically still," she said softly, "such an arrangement would require significant trust on both sides." "Trust," he agreed, "and clear understanding of what each brings to the partnership, what each hopes to gain." Eleanor was about to respond when the boarding house door burst open, admitting a well-dressed man in his 40s, accompanied by two miners in work clothes. The newcomer's gaze swept the dining room, settling on Eleanor with an expression of triumph. "Miss Eleanor Reed, I presume," he called loudly, striding toward their table. "Matthew Preston, president of Silvercliff Mining and Development Company. I understand you're attempting to claim the North Star mine." The abrupt introduction caught Eleanor off guard. "Mr. Preston, I don't believe we've been introduced properly. Formalities seem unnecessary given the circumstances," Preston replied dismissively. His attention shifted to Blackwood, his expression cooling noticeably. "Blackwood, should have known you'd be involved, still haunting the high country and interfering in legitimate business." Blackwood's face remained impassive, but Eleanor noticed his posture tighten. "Preston," he acknowledged without elaboration. Preston returned his focus to Eleanor. "Miss Reed, I'll be direct. The North Star mine represents a significant investment opportunity for our company. We had arrangements with Richard Dawson before his unfortunate accident. Discussions regarding purchase of his claim." "Strange," Blackwood commented. "Dawson never mentioned selling to you, not even when we discussed his future plans 2 days before the Avalanche." Preston's jaw tightened. "The negotiations were preliminary, but substantive enough that our company has filed a prior interest claim with Commissioner Wilson this morning." Eleanor felt a chill of understanding. "You're contesting my claim to the North Star." "Merely asserting our company's pre-existing interest," Preston corrected with a thin smile. "Business is business, Miss Reed. The North Star requires significant capital to recover from the avalanche damage. Capital a woman alone simply doesn't possess." The condescension in his tone ignited Eleanor's determination. "My financial resources are not your concern, Mr. Preston, and any arrangements you claim to have had with Richard died with him unless you have signed documents, which I suspect you do not." Preston's smile faltered slightly. "Commissioner Wilson will weigh all factors, including which claimant can best develop the resource for the territory's benefit. Our company employs 30 men and supports their families. What do you bring to Silvercliff besides Eastern sentimentality?" Blackwood rose slowly to his feet, his height and presence suddenly imposing despite his quiet manner. "Miss Reed brings a legal claim, Preston. Something your company manufactures when convenient." The veiled accusation hung in the air between them. Preston's expression darkened. "Wilson hasn't ruled yet," he said tightly, "and the Commissioner understands what's best for Silvercliff's development." He turned back to Eleanor, forcing a more conciliatory tone. "Miss Reed, there's no need for unpleasantness. My company is prepared to offer compensation for any claim you might establish. $300, a generous sum that would allow you to return east comfortably, or establish herself here without your interference." Blackwood countered. Eleanor found her voice. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. Preston. I'll consider it after Commissioner Wilson makes his determination tomorrow." Preston studied her for a moment, reassessing. "Very well. Though I should mention the teaching position you've been considering. The school board chairman happens to be my brother-in-law. Your prospects there might be affected by your decision regarding the mine." The thinly veiled threat confirmed Eleanor's growing understanding of Silvercliff's power structure. Preston wasn't just a businessman, he was someone accustomed to controlling the settlement's opportunities and resources. "Are you threatening Miss Reed?" Blackwood's voice remained conversational, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. Preston stepped back slightly, simply clarifying the interconnected nature of our community. "Good day, Miss Reed. I look forward to resolving this matter amicably." After Preston and his men departed, Eleanor released a shaky breath. He seemed quite confident of success. "Preston usually gets what he wants in Silvercliff," Blackwood acknowledged. "Money talks, but he doesn't control Commissioner Wilson completely, and he doesn't know about your letters or the Peterson precedent." "He implied he could block the teaching position," Eleanor said, troubled by the interconnected obstacles suddenly appearing in her path. "Probably could," Blackwood agreed. "His influence reaches most corners of town. But not the mountains," Eleanor murmured almost to herself. Blackwood's gaze sharpened. "No, not the mountains." The simple exchange conveyed volumes. In that moment, Eleanor understood that whatever path she chose would involve opposition from Preston and his allies. The simple future she had journeyed west to find had transformed into something more complex, a contest of wills and resources with her independence at stake. "What do you know about Preston's company?" she asked. "Buys up smaller claims, consolidates them into larger operations. Not illegal, but his methods sometimes border on coercion." Blackwood's expression darkened. "He's had his eye on the upper. Valley claims for years, Richard's mine others, and Hidden Valley." The question slipped out before Eleanor could consider its implications. Something protective flashed in Blackwood's eyes. "Preston doesn't know about Hidden Valley. Few do, and it stays that way." The fierce declaration revealed more about Gabriel Blackwood's connection to his mountain sanctuary than any direct explanation could have. That valley wasn't just his home. It was something he guarded, valued above all else. "I understand," Eleanor said softly. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Holloway appearing with coffee. "That Preston," she muttered as she filled their cups, "always throwing his weight around, been trying to buy my boarding house for 2 years. "Why? Does he want it?" Eleanor asked. "Location. Wants to tear it down, build company offices." The landlady sniffed disapprovingly. "Offered twice what it's worth, but some things aren't for sale." The sentiment resonated with Eleanor. Some things weren't for sale, including, she was beginning to realize, her right to determine her own path forward. "If the commissioner rules, in my favor tomorrow," she said to Blackwood after Mrs. Holloway departed, "Preston will only increase his pressure." "Likely," he agreed. "Man doesn't like losing." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "Then I should be prepared to stand firm. Would you—" She hesitated, then continued with newfound resolve. "Would you be willing to discuss that partnership we were hypothetically considering?" "Not hypothetically." Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes kindled to life. "Yes," he said simply. "I would." Dawn arrived with a clarity that matched Eleanor's resolve. The previous evening, after Preston's departure, she and Blackwood had discussed the practical aspects of a potential partnership until Mrs. Holloway's curious hovering had made private conversation impossible. They had agreed to meet after the commissioner's ruling to finalize their plans. Whatever those might be, Eleanor dressed with deliberate care, selecting her most formal attire, a charcoal grey travelling suit with subtle burgundy trim. The outfit had been purchased for her arrival meeting with Richard, a detail that now seemed fitting as she prepared to claim his legacy. When she descended to the dining room, she found Blackwood already waiting. He too had made concessions to the day's importance, wearing a clean buckskin jacket over a crisp white shirt. His dark hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed. The effect was striking, wilderness refinement that suited him better than conventional town attire would have. "You look prepared for battle," he commented quietly as she joined him. "In a sense I am," she replied. "Preston made it clear yesterday that this won't be simple." "Nothing worthwhile usually is." Blackwood's steady gaze conveyed confidence in her ability to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Wilson opens his office at 9. We should be first in line. They found the mining commissioner already at his desk when they arrived, ledgers open before him. His expression gave nothing away as he gestured for them to be seated. "I've reviewed your documentation extensively, Miss Reed," he began without preamble. "The Peterson precedent does indeed apply to your situation. Your correspondence with Richard Dawson establishes clear intent to marry, and your financial investment in traveling to fulfill that arrangement represents good faith effort." Eleanor felt a surge of hope. "Then you recognize my claim to the North Star?" "I do," Wilson confirmed, "with certain conditions." "What conditions?" Blackwood asked, his tone revealing nothing. "First, the claim must be actively worked within 30 days, as territorial law requires. Second, given the claim's value and the competing interest from Silvercliff Mining and Development, you must file a bond of $200 as security against development. The bond requirement was unexpected and clearly designed to create an obstacle. $200 represented a significant portion of Eleanor's remaining funds. "Is such a bond standard procedure?" she asked carefully. Wilson adjusted his spectacles. "It's within my discretionary authority when multiple parties express interest in a claim. The bond ensures serious intent rather than speculative holding." "And if Miss Reed meets these conditions," Blackwood pressed, "then the North Star mine will be officially transferred to her name." Wilson pushed a document across his desk. "This provisional certificate acknowledges your claim pending fulfillment of the conditions. You have until close of business on June 30th to post the bond and provide evidence of active mining operations." Eleanor accepted the certificate, studying its official language. Despite the challenging conditions, she had won the first battle, Richard's claim, and the future it represented could be hers. "Thank you, Commissioner," she said, rising from her chair. "I'll meet the requirements within the specified time frame." Outside the office, Blackwood guided her to a quiet side street away from curious onlookers. "Bond requirement is Preston's influence," he said bluntly. "Wilson's fair but not immune to pressure. $200 is substantial, Eleanor. Acknowledged, but not impossible. I can manage it." She hesitated, then added, "If we proceed with our partnership discussion." Blackwood nodded, understanding the qualification. "Partnership would make meeting both conditions easier. I have equipment, expertise. You have the claim rights and sufficient capital for the bond. Then we should formalize our arrangement," Eleanor suggested. "Before Preston discovers Wilson's ruling and increases his efforts to block us." "Territorial courthouse," Blackwood agreed. "Can file partnership papers there. Make it official and legally binding." The courthouse occupied a modest building near the center of Silvercliff. Inside, a clerk provided the necessary forms for establishing a mining partnership. Eleanor and Blackwood worked together to complete the documentation, specifying equal ownership, shared responsibilities, and mutual benefits. "Need to list residential arrangements," the clerk mentioned, not looking up from his ledger. "Territory requires clear documentation of living situations in business partnerships between unmarried persons of opposite gender." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, despite the practical nature of the requirement. Blackwood answered without hesitation, "Separate residences. Miss Reed will occupy the reconstructed cabin at the North Star claim. I maintain my existing residence nearby." The clerk nodded, recording this information without comment. After reviewing the completed documents, he applied the territorial seal and handed them each a copy. "Congratulations," he said with bureaucratic indifference. "Your partnership is officially registered." Outside the courthouse, Eleanor felt a curious mix of emotions, relief at having secured her claim and established a viable path forward, uncertainty about the practical challenges ahead, and something more complex regarding the man now officially her business partner. "We should return to the commissioner's office," Blackwood suggested, "post the bond and notify him of our partnership arrangement." The transaction was completed efficiently, with Wilson making appropriate notations in his ledger. "Partnership with Mr. Blackwood is a practical solution," he observed neutrally. "His experience with mountain mining operations will be valuable in redeveloping the North Star." As they left the commissioner's office for the second time that morning, Eleanor noticed a changed quality in the glances they received from Silvercliff residents, less curiosity and more speculation. News traveled quickly in small settlements. Their newly formalized association would be common knowledge before sundown. "I should inform the school board I won't be pursuing the teaching position," Eleanor said as they walked along the main street. Blackwood nodded. "Practical to eliminate competing obligations. Have time before your interview this afternoon. Could purchase supplies for the claim first." The suggestion made sense. Together they visited Jenkins's general store, where Eleanor used part of her remaining funds to purchase necessities for rehabilitating the cabin at the North Star, tools, cooking equipment, basic furniture. Jenkins recorded their selections with poorly concealed interest in their partnership. "Heard Wilson recognized your claim," he commented while totaling their purchases. "Preston's been in a foul mood all morning," came storming out of the commissioner's office like a grizzly with a thorn in its paw. "I imagine he's unaccustomed to setbacks," Eleanor replied diplomatically. Jenkins chuckled. "That's putting it mildly. Man expects this town to dance to his tune." He glanced at Blackwood. "You taking her up on this claim today?" "Tomorrow," Blackwood answered. "Need to arrange transportation for supplies." "Can have my boy bring everything up with the wagon," Jenkins offered. "For a reasonable fee, of course." They had just completed arrangements for delivery when the U.I. store's door opened, revealing Matthew Preston. His expression darkened at the sight of them. "Miss Reed," he acknowledged tersely, "I understand congratulations are in order. Wilson has recognized your claim, and you've already secured a convenient partnership." The emphasis on the last word carried clear insinuation. "Our arrangement is properly documented and entirely legitimate," Eleanor replied coolly. As Commissioner Wilson confirmed this morning, Preston's attention shifted to Blackwood. "Always finding ways to interfere with progress, aren't you? First your refusal to sell your own claim, now this alliance to block Silvercliff Mining's expansion." "Business decision," Blackwood replied impassively. "Same as yours." "Hardly the same," Preston scoffed. "The North Star requires significant capital investment to recover from the Avalanche damage. Capital my company possesses and your partnership clearly lacks." Eleanor stepped forward, holding Preston's gaze. "Our financial arrangements are not your concern, Mr. Preston. The law has recognized my claim, and my partner and I intend to develop it according to our own plans." Preston studied her with newfound calculation. "You surprise me, Miss Reed. I expected Eastern refinement to wilt quickly in our mountain environment. Instead, you've adapted remarkably. Flexibility." The pause before the last word dripped with insinuation. "Careful, Preston," Blackwood warned quietly. The businessman raised his hands in mock surrender. "Merely observing that Miss Reed has quickly embraced frontier pragmatism. No offense intended." His tone belied the words. "I should mention, however, that mining partnerships face numerous challenges. Technical difficulties, equipment failures, unexpected expenses. Should you find yourselves overextended, my offer to purchase remains open." The veiled threat was clear. Preston would not accept defeat easily. "We'll keep that in mind," Eleanor said neutrally. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have appointments to keep." Outside, Eleanor released a tense breath. "He's not going to simply accept Wilson's ruling, is he?" Preston doesn't surrender profitable opportunities, Blackwood confirmed. He'll look for weaknesses, apply pressure where he can. Then we'll need to be vigilant. Eleanor's determination strengthened in the face of opposition. I should speak with the school board now to formally withdraw from consideration for the teaching position. They parted temporarily, agreeing to meet at the boarding house afterward to finalize plans for departing to the claim site the following morning. Eleanor found Sarah Winters at the schoolhouse, grading student work despite the term having officially ended. I've come to withdraw from consideration for the teaching position, Eleanor explained after greetings were exchanged. My circumstances have changed. Sarah didn't seem surprised. I heard about your mining claim. News travels quickly here. And about my partnership with Mr. Blackwood, I imagine, Eleanor added wryly. That too. Sarah set aside her work. People will talk, of course. They always do when presented with arrangements that don't fit their narrow expectations. Does it bother you? Eleanor asked, curious about the older woman's perspective. The talk? Sarah considered the question. When I first came west, yes. I was raised with Boston propriety too. Appearances mattered above all else. But mountains teach different lessons about what truly holds value. She studied Eleanor thoughtfully. Is your partnership with Blackwood strictly business? The directness of the question caught Eleanor off guard, but she appreciated the honest approach. For now, yes. Beyond that, remains to be determined. Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity contained in that simple answer. The territory offers freedoms impossible back east, including the freedom to define relationships on your own terms. That unsettles people accustomed to rigid categories. Like Matthew Preston, Eleanor observed. Preston's concerns are primarily financial, not moral, Sarah corrected. His objections would vanish instantly if he saw profit in supporting you. She rose, extending her hand. I wish you success, Eleanor, whatever form that takes. The conversation left Eleanor feeling strangely light-hearted as she returned to the boarding house. Sarah's perspective had reinforced her growing belief that life in the Colorado Territory offered possibilities beyond the constrained roles available to women in Eastern society. Blackwood was waiting on the porch, his pack horse already loaded, with supplies for their journey. Jenkins' boy will follow tomorrow with the wagon, he reported. Weather looks clear for travel. Mrs. Holloway emerged from the boarding house, wiping her hands on her apron. So, it's true then, she said without preamble. You two are partnering on the North Star claim. We are, Eleanor confirmed, seeing no reason for evasion. The landlady nodded decisively. Good. About time someone stood up to Preston's land grabbing, been swallowing up every promising claim in the county. You're not concerned about propriety? Eleanor asked, somewhat surprised by Mrs. Holloway's apparent approval. Propriety? The older woman snorted. Girl, this is Colorado Territory. Folks who survive here focus on practical matters, not drawing room gossip. You and Blackwood have skills and resources that complement each other. Makes perfect sense to join forces. The straightforward assessment was refreshing after Preston's insinuations. Eleanor felt a renewed appreciation for frontier directness. Will you be keeping your room here? Mrs. Holloway asked. No, Eleanor replied. We'll be rehabilitating the cabin at the claim site. I'll settle my account before departing tomorrow. The landlady nodded. Figured as much. Well, your room's always available if you need to come to town for supplies or to escape mountain solitude for a spell. As evening approached, Eleanor and Blackwood finalized their plans over dinner in the boarding house dining room. They would depart at dawn, taking the most direct route to the North Star claim. The journey would require most of a day, but would position them to begin work immediately on clearing Avalanche debris and assessing the mine's condition. Cabin won't be habitable immediately, Blackwood cautioned. We'll need to construct a temporary shelter while rebuilding. "I'm not afraid of difficult conditions," Eleanor assured him. "Boston winters taught me to endure discomfort when necessary." A rare smile touched his features. "Mountains will test that endurance, but I suspect you'll meet the challenge." As they finished their meal, Eleanor became aware of curious glances from other diners. Their partnership was clearly the subject of speculation throughout Silvercliff, yet she found herself remarkably unconcerned with others' opinions. The path she had chosen offered purpose, independence, and potential prosperity, considerations that far outweighed conventional propriety. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains as Eleanor prepared to depart Silvercliff. She had packed her belongings carefully, taking only what would be practical for life at the mining claim. Her Boston finery remained in trunks stored in Mrs. Holloway's attic, relics of a life that already seemed distant. Blackwood waited with the horses, his expression revealing approval of her practical attire, sturdy riding skirt, wool jacket, and serviceable boots. "Ready?" he asked simply. "Yes," she replied, mounting her mare with growing confidence. The animal was becoming familiar, responding to her commands with increasing trust. They rode out of Silvercliff as the settlement was just beginning to stir, following a trail that wound into the mountains toward Silver Pine Gulch. The morning air was crisp with pine scent and the promise of new beginnings. "Once we reach the claim," Blackwood said as they rode side by side up a gentle slope, first priority was clearing a safe path to the mine entrance. Avalanche debris makes navigation dangerous, and after that, assessment of mine workings, determining what equipment survived, what needs replacement. He glanced at her. "Establishing your living quarters." The practical focus was characteristic of him, but Eleanor sensed something more beneath his methodical planning, a commitment to ensuring her safety and comfort despite the challenges ahead. By midday, they had climbed high enough to glimpse Silver Pine Gulch in the distance. The devastation remained stark, a swathe of destruction cutting through what had once been forest. Yet something had changed since Eleanor's first viewing of the site. Perhaps it was her perspective, or perhaps it was the tiny green shoots beginning to emerge among the debris, nature's first efforts at reclamation. "Life returns," Blackwood commented, noting her gaze. "Take 50 years, but the forest will regrow, different but strong again." The observation contained wisdom applicable beyond the landscape. Eleanor thought of her own transformation since arriving in Colorado, the shattering of expected futures, the period of uncertainty, and now the emergence of new possibilities as they descended into the gulch. Following carefully the trail Blackwood identified as safest, Eleanor caught sight of something unexpected, a flash of blue among the browns and greys of the avalanche debris. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. Blackwood squinted. "Looks like fabric. Strange." They approached cautiously, mindful of unstable ground. As they drew closer, Eleanor gasped in recognition. Amid the jumbled rocks and broken timber lay a weathered trunk, its lid partially open, revealing glimpses of clothing and personal items. "Richard's trunk," she breathed. "The avalanche must have carried it from the cabin." Blackwood dismounted, testing each step before putting his full weight down. He reached the trunk and carefully examined its contents. "Clothing mostly," he reported. "Some books, papers." He retrieved a leather-bound volume and a packet of documents tied with string. "Might be important. Claim records, maybe." They secured the salvageable items to Blackwood's packhorse, unable to safely retrieve the trunk itself from its precarious position. The unexpected discovery felt significant, a tangible connection to Richard Dawson and the life he had built. Here, by late afternoon, they reached the mine entrance, partially obscured by debris, but intact. Blackwood dismounted to examine the timber supports. "Structures sound," he announced after careful inspection. "Avalanche didn't penetrate the main shaft. Good sign." Nearby, they found the stone foundation of Richard's cabin, all that remained of the structure. Blackwood indicated a relatively flat area about 50 yards away, sheltered by a massive boulder. Best location for temporary shelter, he said. Protected from wind, close enough to the work site but safe distance from unstable debris. As the sun began its descent behind the western ridge, they established a basic camp, a canvas tent secured against the boulder, a fire pit ringed with stones, their supplies arranged for practical access. The simplicity of their accommodations might have shocked Eleanor just weeks earlier, but now she found satisfaction in its functionality. While Blackwood prepared a simple meal over their campfire, Eleanor examined the documents recovered from Richard's trunk. Most were indeed related to the mine, assay reports showing silver content, maps of the underground workings, and supply invoices. But among these practical records, she found something unexpected, a letter addressed to her, unfinished and never sent. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper, recognizing Richard's familiar handwriting. My dear Eleanor, as I await your arrival, now just 3 weeks distant, I find myself reflecting on the curious path that brought us together. Two strangers separated by a continent, connected through words on paper, soon to join our lives in this remote but beautiful place. I wonder if you will find it as captivating as I do. These mountains that challenge and reward in equal measure, this simple life that strips away pretense and reveals true character. I've prepared the cabin as best I can, though I know it will seem modest compared to your Boston home. What it lacks in refinement, I hope it compensates for in honesty and potential. Like this land, it is unfinished, waiting for your touch to transform it into something more complete. There is something I must tell you upon your arrival, a development regarding the mine that may alter our plans somewhat. Nothing to cause alarm, but a matter requiring discussion and mutual decision. I find myself grateful that your letters have revealed a practical mind and adaptable spirit, qualities essential for life here. Until your arrival, I remain. The letter ended there, unfinished. Whatever Richard had intended to tell her about the mine remained unknown, interrupted by the avalanche that had claimed his life. Eleanor carefully refolded the paper, touched by his words and saddened anew by the future they would never share. Found something? Blackwood asked, noticing her expression as he handed her a tin plate of beans and salt pork. A letter Richard was writing to me, she explained. Never completed or sent. He mentioned a development regarding the mine that we would need to discuss. Blackwood frowned thoughtfully. Might explain why Preston's so interested. Maybe Richard discovered something significant before the avalanche. Do you think Preston knew? Possible. Mining communities run on information. Who's finding color, who's struggling. Rich strikes rarely stay secret long. Eleanor considered this as they ate in companionable silence, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above. Whatever Richard had discovered remained to be rediscovered, part of the legacy she had inherited through an unexpected chain of events. As night settled fully over the mountains, Eleanor gazed up at the brilliant canopy of stars. Her journey had brought her not to the future she had anticipated, but to this moment, sitting beside a campfire with a man she hadn't known existed weeks ago, preparing to build something neither of them had planned. No regrets? Blackwood asked quietly, following her gaze to the stars. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Sorrow for what might have been, she answered honestly. Grief for Richard's lost life. But regrets? No, this path feels right, despite its unexpected nature. Blackwood nodded, understanding. Mountains teach acceptance of change. Resistance breaks. Adaptation survives. Is that why you came here? She asked. After the war, he was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low. Came seeking isolation. Found perspective instead. Mountains don't care about a man's past or his missing arm. Judge only by what he builds. how he endures. The simple explanation revealed more about Gabriel Blackwood than any detailed history could have. Like her, he had come to the Colorado Territory seeking something different from his previous life. Like her, he had found unexpected possibilities in these rugged heights. "Tomorrow we begin building," he said, rising to bank the fire for the night. "Partnership starts with clearing debris, re-establishing the claim." "And after that?" Eleanor asked, wondering how their future might unfold beyond immediate practicalities. Blackwood looked at her across the glowing embers, his expression softening in the firelight. "After that, we discover what the mountains have waiting for us, together." The word contained possibilities neither of them had articulated yet, a promise of shared endeavor that might grow into something more profound. Eleanor smiled, accepting both the immediate plan and the open-ended future it suggested. In the morning, they would begin the physical work of reclaiming Richard Dawson's legacy from the Avalanche's destruction. But something else was already taking shape between them, a connection built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the recognition of complementary strengths. Eleanor Reed had traveled west, seeking a predetermined future with a man she knew only through letters. Instead, she had found an unexpected path forward, with a man revealed to her through actions rather than words. The mountains had destroyed her original plans, but offered something perhaps more valuable in return: the freedom to build a life, on her own terms, alongside someone who valued that same independence. As the campfire subsided to glowing coals, Eleanor gazed once more at the stars blanketing the mountain sky. Boston seemed a lifetime ago. Its constraints and expectations faded like distant memories. Here, amid the challenging beauty of the Colorado Territory, she had found not just a claim to a silver mine, but a claim to her own destiny. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, practical obstacles, Preston's opposition, the physical demands of mountain life. But tonight, in this moment of quiet connection beneath the stars, Eleanor knew with certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in a path forward. A path that wound through these mountains, offered purpose and independence, and held the promise of a future limited only by her own courage and determination. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.